Morning of my wedding, I found a parking ticket on my windshield. I remember standing in the hotel parking lot in my robe, hair half done, staring at that little orange envelope tucked under the wiper like it was some kind of omen. $47. My maid of honor Simone grabbed it out of my hand and shoved it in her purse. Not today, she said. Absolutely not today. She was right. Nothing was going to ruin that day, except something did. And it wasn't a parking ticket. My name is Ivy. I was a 32-year-old high school English teacher when I married the man I thought was the love of my life. I want to tell you what happened at my reception, not the version I've rehearsed in my head 1,000 times, the one where I stay calm and dignified and don't chase him through the lobby in my wedding dress, but the real version. The one I've only told 3 people in my entire life. And I want to tell you what happened 6 years later. The night he showed up at the back of a restaurant in Savannah and stood there, watching me exchange vows with someone else, with an expression I'll carry in my memory until the day I die. But first, let me tell you about Owen. We met at a school district professional development workshop, one of those mandatory Saturday sessions that everyone resents. Bad coffee in styrofoam cups, a presenter reading off slides, fluorescent lights humming overhead. I was grading papers in the back row when the man next to me leaned over and whispered, "If she reads that bullet point one more time, I'm going to need you to be my witness." I looked up. He had dyes and ink on his hand from a pen that had leaked in his pocket, and I laughed in spite of myself. Owen was a 3rd-grade teacher at an elementary school 2 districts over. He coached Little League on weekends. He called his mother every Sunday. He was the most genuinely decent person I'd ever been attracted to, and I spent the first 3 months waiting for the other shoe to drop. It never did. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, and he did it in the most Owen way possible. No restaurant, no grand gesture. Just the 2 of us on the back porch of my apartment on a Tuesday night in October. Him handing me a mug of chamomile tea and then somehow producing a ring from his hoodie pocket while I was mid-sip. I nearly choked. He patted my back. We both laughed until we cried. It was perfect. There was one thing I knew about Owen before I married him, and I knew it because he'd told me himself, early on, when we were still in that stage of carefully offering each other the harder pieces. He had been engaged before. 3 years before we met. Her name was Brooke. She had ended things. He said they wanted different things, that she had taken a position at a firm in Chicago and decided she'd rather focus on her career, and that he had needed a long time to make peace with it. He said he had made peace with it. He said he had made peace with it. I believed him. I had no reason not to. The wedding was in April. 80 guests at an event space downtown that used to be a textile mill. Exposed brick, Edison bulbs, long wooden tables. My mother cried getting me into my dress. My father, who passed away 2 years before I met Owen, wasn't there, and I felt his absence like a missing tooth all day, my tongue going back to it even when I tried not to. But Owen cried when he saw me walking toward him, and my dad would have loved Owen, and for a moment everything felt like it was going to be okay. The ceremony was everything I wanted. We wrote our own vows. Owen promised to always be the person who brought me tea when I was up too late grading, who turned off the lights I left on in every room, who would argue with me about books and never let me win just to make me feel better. I promised to love him on the Saturdays when Little League ran long, and I had to eat dinner alone, to be patient when he needed quiet, to never stop being the woman in the back row who laughed at his jokes. When the officiant said we were married, the room erupted and Owen kissed me, and I thought, this is it. This is the thing everyone means when they talk about knowing. The reception had been going for maybe 2 hours when I noticed. I was at the bar with Simone, a glass of champagne in each hand, one for me, one for her, laughing about something, I don't even remember what. And I glanced over at the main floor, and Owen was standing near the edge of the dance floor, phone pressed to his ear, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the way he was standing, his back to the room, his shoulders pulled in toward his ears, his free hand pressed flat against the exposed brick wall like he needed it to hold him up. I handed Simone both glasses and walked toward him. I was maybe 10 feet away when he hung up and turned around. The expression on his face stopped me mid-step. I had never seen him look like that. Not scared exactly, Something more complicated than scared. "What's wrong?" I said. "Owen, what's wrong?" He looked at me for a moment like he was trying to memorize my face. Then he said, "I need to step out for a few minutes. There's something I need to handle." Handle? Tonight? I know, Ivy, I'm sorry, He glanced toward the exit. "Give me 20 minutes. He didn't give me 20 minutes. He didn't come back at all. I stood in the lobby of that old textile mill in my wedding dress for 45 minutes, Simone beside me, both of us watching the door. Guests filtered past with careful, concerned expressions. My mother asked me twice what was happening, and I had to keep saying, I don't know, because I truly didn't. His car was gone from the parking lot. He wasn't answering his phone. My new husband of 4 hours had vanished at our wedding reception, and I had no idea why. The weeks after that were the strangest of my life. Not the worst. The worst came later, in the quiet, when the adrenaline and the shock wore off and I had to actually live inside what had happened. But the weeks immediately after were strange because everything still looked the same. I still went to school on Monday morning. My students still handed in their papers. The sun still came up. And somewhere, Owen existed, not answering my calls, his apartment dark when I drove past it at night, which I did twice and I'm not ashamed to say it. It was his brother Troy who finally told me the truth. He showed up at my school on a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after the wedding, and waited by my car in the parking lot. He looked terrible, pale, something guilty around his eyes. "I think you deserve to know," he said. "I've been going back and forth about it, but I'd want someone to tell me." What he told me was this: Brooke had called Owen the day before the wedding. After 3 years of silence. She was back from Chicago, her job had changed. Things hadn't worked out the way she planned. She'd heard Owen was getting married, and she'd reached out because she said she needed closure. Owen hadn't told me because he didn't think it mattered. He had decided to ignore it and move forward. But then she had called again. During the reception. And what she said in that second call was that she was pregnant. That it was Owen's. That she needed him to come. Troy paused. He rubbed the back of his neck. "She wasn't pregnant," he said. "We know that now. There was no baby. She made it up. She saw his wedding announcement on their mutual friend's social media, and she panicked, and she made it up." I sat down on the hood of my car. I didn't care about the dent. "And Owen," I said, "he believed her, he went to her, and by the time he figured out what she'd done, he'd been staying at her place for 2 weeks and he felt like he couldn't face you, like what he'd done was so unforgivable that coming back wasn't an option. That was his choice to make." My voice came out flat. Troy didn't answer. There was nothing to say. I filed for an annulment 3 months after the wedding. My lawyer was calm and practical about it, which I appreciated. The grounds were fraud. He had concealed an ongoing emotional attachment to a previous relationship that directly affected his ability to commit. It took time. It cost money I didn't have, and every step of it felt like being asked to prove that my own marriage had never been real. The depression didn't arrive all at once. It came in the way water gets into an old house, slowly, through cracks you didn't know were there, until one day you realize everything is damp. I kept teaching. I kept showing up. But I stopped calling people back. I stopped going to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings that I'd loved. I ate the same 3 things on rotation for 5 months because thinking about food felt like too much. What pulled me back, strangely, was a student. His name was Cooper, and he was 16 years old and failing junior English because he hadn't turned in a single assignment since October. When I finally sat down with him one afternoon to find out why, he told me his mum had left in September. Just packed a bag and drove away. His dad was working doubles to keep them in their house, so Cooper was coming home to an empty apartment every day and couldn't make himself care about The Great Gatsby. I said to him, "I know what it feels like when someone leaves and doesn't explain why, and I know it feels like you'll be in it forever, but you won't." He looked at me. "How do you know?" "Because I'm standing here talking to you, and a year ago I didn't think I'd be able to." I stayed after school with him twice a week for the rest of the semester. We got through Gatsby. He passed. I started calling people back. His father, a widower named Joel who worked as a structural engineer, sent me an email at the end of the school year to thank me for what I'd done for his son. A formal email, slightly stiff, clearly written and rewritten. He mentioned that Cooper had talked about me every day for weeks and that he'd never seen his son turn something around like that. He said he was grateful. I wrote back. He wrote back. We met for coffee on a Saturday in July, just to talk. Joel very clear that this was not anything other than a parent wanting to thank a teacher in person. He showed up in a button-down he'd ironed too carefully, and he was nervous, and it was endearing and terrible at the same time. Cooper's teacher, he kept saying, I want to be respectful of the situation. It's coffee, I said. It's just coffee. It was not just coffee. But we took our time with it. Joel had been alone for 4 years since losing his wife to an illness that had taken 14 months from diagnosis to the end. He was quiet in a way that had nothing to do with being boring. He was quiet the way people are when they've had to learn to sit with hard things. He asked good questions and listened to the answers. He brought Cooper up without prompting, which I liked. He was not trying to be anything other than what he was. We became friends first. Real friends, the kind where you call each other when something small happens that the other person would appreciate, a funny road sign, a sentence from a book, a story about a kid in second period who used the word discombobulated correctly in a sentence. That kind of friendship. It took almost a year before either of us named what it had become. Cooper thought it was hilarious. I've literally been trying to get this to happen since November, he said, when we finally told him. He was 17 by then, 2 inches taller, reading books outside of class because he wanted to. You two are the most oblivious people I've ever met. You're grounded, Joel said. I don't think you can ground her, Cooper said, pointing at me. We all laughed. It was the first time I laughed like that fully, until my eyes watered, since before the wedding. Joel proposed at the end of the following spring. We were on the back porch of his house in Savannah's Ardsley Park neighborhood, where the old oaks drop leaves all year and the sidewalks are uneven from the roots pushing up underneath. He had a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, white gold, a simple oval stone, and he held it out with both hands like he was offering something fragile. He said, I know we've both had reasons to be careful. I don't want to be careful anymore. I want to be with you. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We planned the wedding for the following October. Nothing like my first one. No 80-person guest list, no event space with Edison bulbs. We rented the private room of a restaurant in the Starland district, 27 people, low lights, good food, Cooper sitting at the table closest to the front because he'd asked to. Because he said he wanted a good view. The week before the wedding, I finally went through the last storage box from my old apartment. I'd been moving it from place to place for 6 years without opening it, telling myself I'd deal with it later. My therapist had been patient about this. When you're ready, she kept saying. Not a day before. I opened it on a Tuesday night while Joel was working late. Inside were cards from the reception, a few photographs Simone had salvaged, and the little handwritten card I'd made for Owen's wedding gift. The silly inside joke card I'd spent a week writing. At the bottom was a letter in an envelope I didn't recognize. It was from Owen, dated 3 days after the wedding. He'd mailed it to my apartment, and it had arrived while I was staying at my mother's, and Simone must have packed it without realizing what it was. I sat on the floor and read it. He wrote that he knew there was nothing he could say that would make it right. He wrote that when Brooke called during the reception, she said the baby wasn't his, that it was, but that she'd chosen to have it alone and she didn't want anything from him except to hear his voice one more time before everything changed. He said he went to her not out of love but out of guilt, out of the leftover responsibility he'd never fully worked through, and that he realized within days that she had manipulated the situation and that there had never been a baby at all. He wrote that by the time he understood what had actually happened, he had convinced himself that I was better off without someone who could make the choice he had made. He said he thought about reaching out every year on April 14th, which was our anniversary. He said he never did because he was a coward. He signed it, "I'm sorry" doesn't cover it. But I am. I'm sorry. I held that letter for a long time. Then I folded it back into the envelope and put it in my bag because Joel would be home soon, and I needed to tell him everything, and I didn't want to do it in pieces. I told him that night. All of it. He listened without interrupting, which is what he does. He just listens, really listens, and waits until you're done. "Does any of this change things for you?" he asked. I thought about it honestly before I answered. "It explains something I needed explained," I said. "But no, it doesn't change anything." He nodded. He took my hand. We went to bed. The night before the wedding, I made a decision. I wasn't going to respond to the letter. I'd made that choice already, months ago in a theoretical sense, and opening the letter had only confirmed it. I didn't want a conversation with Owen. I didn't want more explanation. I wanted to get married tomorrow to a man who had never once given me a reason to question what I meant to him. The morning of the wedding was warm for October. Savannah in the fall does this thing where the light comes through the Spanish moss and turns everything gold. And I stood outside the restaurant before anyone else arrived and just breathed it in. Simone showed up behind me with coffee. "Ready," she said. I was. The ceremony was in the restaurant's courtyard. Joel was already there when I walked in, standing next to the officiant with Cooper beside him as his best man, 17 years old in a blazer that still had the price tag Simone discreetly removed at the last minute. Joel's face when he saw me was the same face he makes when something moves him and he doesn't have words for it. Very still, very present. We kept our vows short because both of us have said enough complicated things in our lives. Joel said, "I promise to show up, every day, in the small ways and the big ones. And I promise that you will never have to wonder." I said, "I promise to trust you, not because trust comes easy to me, but because you've earned it, and because choosing you is the easiest choice I've ever made." Cooper handed over the rings and then ruined his composure completely by crying, which he will deny until the end of time. We had just moved inside for dinner. The first round of appetizers was hitting the tables. Joel's dad was making everyone laugh with a story about Joel at 12 years old, when Simone materialized at my elbow. "Don't react," she said quietly, "but turn around slowly." I turned. He was standing at the entrance to the private room, Owen. He looked almost nothing like the man I'd married 6 years ago. He was thinner in a way that wasn't healthy, his collar too loose around his neck, something hollowed out about his face that hadn't been there before. He wore a jacket I think he put on carefully for this, and it made it worse somehow, the effort of it. How he'd found us, I didn't know yet. Later I'd learned that a mutual acquaintance had mentioned our wedding to a friend of his in passing. Savannah is not a large city. Joel appeared beside me. His hand found the small of my back. "Do you want me to handle this?" he asked. "Give me a few minutes," I said. I walked out to him alone. Simone started to follow and I shook my head. This was something I needed to do by myself. We stepped outside into the courtyard, which was empty now, just the string lights overhead and the smell of jasmine from the garden next door. "You found me on my wedding day," I said. Not angry, just stating the fact. "I know." He looked at the ground, then back up at me. "I know how that looks. I'm not trying to. I'm not here to ask for anything. I just needed to see you. I needed you to know that I got your address from your school's website, and I've written this speech in my head 600 times and it still doesn't sound right." "It doesn't have to sound right," I said. "I read the letter, Owen. The one from after the wedding." He blinked. "You did. I found it last week. 6 years late, but I found it." He absorbed this. Something moved across his face that was hard to look at. "She lied about all of it," he said. The pregnancy, the veer was nothing. It took me 2 months to see it clearly, and by then I thought I'd done too much damage to come back." "You had," I said, not to hurt him, because it was true. "I know." He nodded slowly. "I know I had. And I know you've built something. I can see it in there." He gestured toward the restaurant. I could see it from the doorway. "The way that man looked at you. Your son. Is he your son?" "He's Joel's son. He's Joel's son," I said. "He's also one of the best people I know." Owen smiled, and it was a sad smile, the kind that knows it doesn't belong in the room. "Brooke and it didn't last, obviously. She found someone else within a year. I spent a long time trying to figure out how I let someone talk me into leaving you." He paused. I don't have a good answer. I wasn't finished with the past, and I took it out on both of us. I had waited 6 years to be angry at him. Standing there in the courtyard, I kept waiting for the anger to show up. Instead, what I felt was something quieter. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way people mean it in movies. But a kind of release, like something that had been held tight in my chest finally, quietly, let go. "I'm glad you're okay," I said, and I meant it. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "You look happy, really happy. Not the kind people perform for other people, the real kind." "I am," I said. "I really am." He nodded. He took a step back. "I'm going to go. I shouldn't have come, or I had to come, but I should go now." I watched him walk through the courtyard and out through the iron gate. He didn't look back. I stood there another minute by myself, looking up through the string lights at the dark October sky, and I thought about the parking ticket from the morning of my first wedding, and Simone saying not today, and the fact that I hadn't known then what that day would cost me, or what it would eventually give me. Joel found me a few minutes later. He came quietly, the way he does, and stood beside me without asking questions. "You okay?" he finally said. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I really am." He put his arm around me. Inside, through the restaurant windows, I could see Cooper holding court at his table, making his grandfather laugh at something. Simone was looking around for me with an expression that meant she was about to come outside and physically drag me back to my own reception. "Our appetizers are getting cold," Joel said. "Lead the way," I said. We went back inside. There's a version of this story where I'm still angry, where what Owen did defines the narrative permanently, where I am the woman who got left at her reception and never quite recovered. I understand why that story exists. There's something clean about it, something that satisfies the part of us that wants betrayal to be the whole point. But that's not the story I'm living in. The story I'm living in is this. I was broken for a while, and I was honest about being broken, and I found my way back, not through some grand romantic gesture or some perfect second chance moment, but through a failing student and his nervous father and Saturday coffees and book recommendations, and very slow, very deliberate trust. And somewhere in Savannah, there is a man who watched through a restaurant window at the life I built without him, and the expression on his face told me everything I needed to know about whether I'd made the right choice. I had. Some losses are actually redirections. You don't know that when you're standing in the lobby in your wedding dress watching the door. You don't know it for a long time. But eventually, if you let yourself move, you find out. I've thought a lot about why things happened the way they did. Not in a everything happens for a reason way. I don't really believe in that, or at least, I don't believe it excuses the choices people make. Owen made a choice. Brooke made a choice. And those choices had consequences that rippled out in ways neither of them fully calculated. That's the thing about actions taken out of emotional immaturity. They don't stay contained. Owen thought he was leaving to handle something privately, something that didn't involve me, but it involved me completely. Every choice he made in those hours at our reception, every week he spent at Brooke's apartment convincing himself he couldn't come back, all of it landed on me. The annulment paperwork. The 5 months of eating the same 3 meals in rotation. The student I almost failed to notice because I was too far inside my own fog to see clearly. We don't always get to see the full chain. We make a decision and we walk away from it, and we tell ourselves we only affected our own life. But Owen's cowardice, because that's what it was, ultimately, whatever Brooke's manipulation added to it, produced a woman who had to learn from scratch how to trust again. That's not a small thing. That's years of careful, deliberate work. And here's what I want to say about that work, because I think it matters. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't some transformation scene where I woke up one morning healed. It was Cooper sitting across from me in an empty classroom, failing junior English because his mother had left, and me recognizing something in that I hadn't let myself name yet. It was the decision to say out loud, I know what it feels like when someone leaves. It was the recognition that my own experience, the thing I'd been treating like a wound to hide, had made me better at my actual job, more patient, more honest, more willing to sit with someone in the hard part instead of rushing them toward okay. That's not a gift Owen gave me. That's a capacity I built. There's a difference. Joel did not save me. I want to be clear about that, because I think women are often handed that narrative and it doesn't serve us. Joel showed up after I had already done the work of becoming someone who could receive what he was offering. The trust I brought to our relationship, careful, slow, real, came from having had trust broken and choosing, consciously, to try again anyway. That's not something anyone can do for you. And Cooper. I think about Cooper a lot. A 16-year-old kid who lost his mother to abandonment and his grief made him fail junior English, and somehow that intersection produced the family I have now. That's not fate. That's just what happens when you keep showing up to your life even when it doesn't feel worth showing up to. You stay in the classroom. You stay in the conversation. And sometimes the conversation leads somewhere you never could have mapped from the beginning. When Owen stood in that doorway in Savannah and watched me, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something quieter. The recognition that his regret was the natural result of the choices he had made, and that my happiness was the natural result of the ones I had made after him. Not despite the pain. Because of what I chose to do with it. That's the only kind of justice I've ever been able to believe in. Not punishment handed down from somewhere outside. Just the long, patient arithmetic of choices and their consequences, adding up exactly the way they should.